Margaret, we're ready to get started.
Myers, I direct the Asia, excuse me, muted. Okay, thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Margaret Myers, and I direct the Asia and Latin America program at the Inter-American Dialogue. Thank you so much for joining us this morning to consider the various critical ways in which Japan and Latin America might be able to cooperate in the midst of this protracted crisis, and indeed in a very difficult post-COVID-19 environment, ideally to ensure a more rapid and hopefully extensive recovery in parts of the Latin American region and in Japan for that matter. As we've established in many other dialogue events on Japan and Latin America, the relationship is a long-standing one, based on considerable investment in a range of often growth-promoting sectors, but also one that is focused on extensive development-related partnerships, really, which, if you look at what JICA in particular is doing, are in place across much of the region. Japan is also a partner that has much to offer in the tech space, and indeed is invested in telecommunications, in artificial intelligence projects in Latin America that may very well help to boost growth in the region in the coming months and years. Here to help us consider what a maximum productive partnership might look like in the near term are four really expert panelists. In the interest of time, I won't go into depth on their very impressive and extensive backgrounds, but I'd encourage you all to read their longer bios on the Inter-American Dialogue website. But allow me to at least, extend a very warm welcome to, first of all, Martin Rama, the chief economist for the Latin America and Caribbean region at the World Bank, who is speaking with us this morning despite just arriving back in DC an hour or so ago. So thank you, Martin, so much for being here. A warm welcome also to Satoshi Yoshida, who is Director General of the Latin America and Caribbean Department at the Japan International Cooperation Agency, JICA. Who is joining us from Tokyo very late at night. So thank you also for sharing your time with us today, Director General. Susan Hubbard is Senior Associate with the Japan Center for International Exchange in New York, and is both an expert in the field of public health and a health practitioner as a midwife in New York, which I find just truly remarkable. And then finally, Tetsuro Narita is a senior specialist at the IDB Lab Investment Unit. Mr. Narita has worked at IDB Lab for a number of years now, promoting innovation throughout the region and really facilitating some truly fascinating projects there, which I hope he'll tell us a bit about. So with that said, let me first turn to Martin to give us a lay of the land, how things are going in the Latin American region and what international partnerships might mean for future growth projects and recovery. And then we'll move to a discussion of Japan's development assistance to Latin America at this really critical juncture, as well as possibilities for collaboration in health and tech innovation. But before we do that, just a quick reminder to meeting participants to please submit any questions through the Zoom Q&A feature, which you can access at the bottom of your screen, or else through Twitter using hashtag Japan-LAC 2020, or by email through the address meetings@thedialogue.org. And with that, Martin, the floor is yours.
Thank you very, very much, Margaret, and thank you all. Delighted to be with this great panel today. I would like to address a few things. First is just a few words on Latin America and the Caribbean, the region, and where it stands and what is changing. And second, building on my experience where in Asia I had a long collaboration with Japan, at the time JBIC, JICA, what I see as areas of potential for a stronger partnership between Japan and Latin America. At one level, one will say, talking about Latin America and the Caribbean in general, this is a region that faces many challenges. And that's not just because of COVID. This is a region that was growing slowly for almost a decade after the commodity price boom. It had a golden decade of rapid growth, improvement in social indicators, rapid poverty reduction, declines in inequality, which is one of the features of the region. So it looked quite promising. But when there is some echo, I think. Which surpasses the previous. Thank you. So there were several years after the commodity boom ended, where basically the growth rate of the region, Latin America and the Caribbean, was more or less that of advanced economies. So none of the convergence we are seeing in Asia, East Asia, South Asia, was really taking place. Of course, there were different circumstances across countries. Peru, Colombia is more in a crisis mode, Mexico in a never-ending promising. And we had a sign, a social sign of how difficult things were in the year 2019, where we had so many episodes of social unrest. Now, it's not easy to map the social unrest to anything in particular. It varies country by country. It has political connotations, but that showed a region whose aspirations are not being matched by the growth. And on top of that came COVID. And this is a region that has been the worst affected by COVID. It had the health impact of the European countries or North America. Other developing regions did much better on the health front for a variety of reasons. But Sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, anything east of India did much better than Latin America. But in addition, when we look at our estimates for 2020, it will be the region hardest hit in terms of growth. So when you start like this, you will say, so what are the prospects for a partnership in this context? What can we do better? And I want to argue that there is potential, because a couple of things have happened that laid the ground for areas of collaboration, of stronger collaboration with Japan. And I want to preface what these areas are by referring to what was my experience working with JICA, JBIC at the time, when I was in Vietnam, where there was one of the strongest partnerships Japan had. I was the lead economist for the, and then acting country director for a couple of years for the Vietnam program for a long time. And that was a very transformational time in Vietnam. And it was a time when Japan was being very strategic in the sense that there were companies, Japanese companies that saw the potential of Vietnam, that moved in there as first movers before Western companies, which were more confused as to how to operate without the kind of legal framework that was still being put in place. Japanese firms were among the first to move in technological sectors, the Panasonics, the Hondas. And so there was a support by Japan to its manufacturing companies. But there was also a very strategic support to the infrastructure that these companies needed to integrate into global value chains. And so Japan was very heavily involved in infrastructure with the government of Vietnam. And then there was a strong interest in policy. And that was the time when, for the first time after the Miyazawa Initiative, Japan engaged in budget support operations with the World Bank. It was a co-financier, a leading co-financier of a series of development policy loans that really transformed Vietnam. That was the time when we supported WTO accession, a financial sector reform, the first social insurance law. And Japan was very engaged in that too. And it was very engaged even upstream conceptually. We started by a partnership on analytical work on how to think about infrastructure in the process of development of Vietnam. And that was a very strong collaboration, continued with JICA Institute. So we had the whole array that was from the commercial to infrastructure to policy to analytics. And with that, let me then turn back to Latin America, why there could be some potential today for that. And I would say a couple of things. I want to highlight three of them. The first one is that not just because of the pandemic, the trade tensions of the last years have highlighted the appetite in advanced economies to diversify global value chains, not to be so heavily dependent on East Asia, not so heavily depending on China, moving from just in time to just in case. And in that respect, Latin America becomes a much more interesting region. Because it has already, in many cases, deep free trade agreements signed with the US, as was recently the case with Mexico and Canada. But there were many of these agreements before with Peru, with Chile, with Colombia, with the EU. So there is the grounds for those who move strategically to participate in that. And we are seeing other countries moving already. For instance, we see what India is doing on pharmaceuticals, taking advantage of these agreements, relocalizing production to Mexico. So the kind of scheme that worked with those Panasonics and Hondas in the past is something that may be considered as part of the diversification of global supply chains and more to the backyard of the Western advanced economies. Second thing is the pandemic has made it clear that there is a need for much more digitization. And that calls to the tech side that was mentioned by Margaret at the beginning as an area of collaboration. Not everybody in Latin America has broadband access. There is a lot of scope for the transmission technologies to support e-government efforts, to support fintech efforts, and that's the second area. And the third area I will mention, which may seem a bit far-fetched today, but perhaps not so much, is infrastructure. This is a region with a huge infrastructure deficit. Is a region that has lived from fiscal crisis to fiscal crisis, and fiscal crises are solved often by contracting investment in infrastructure because it's much easier to consolidate there than on social services or on staffing. The region had a very globally important push for public-private participation, but now many of these concessions are struggling because of the crisis. Thinking strategically about the potential of infrastructure, which is clearly one of the strengths of Japan, and how to move in a time of limited resources, constraints on financing, need for quality infrastructure will be also an opportunity. So let me stop here in this introduction.
Thank you so much, Martin. That was fantastic, and I think a perfect segue into our next presentation by Mr. Yoshida, who can talk to us about what JICA's, Japan International Cooperation Agency's priorities are in the region at present, and maybe also looking forward. Certainly JICA has invested in infrastructure across the region, certain types of infrastructure for a number of years now, but may also be inclined to address some of these other areas. So please, the floor is yours, Yoshida-san.
Okay, thank you, Margaret, and thank you, Inter-American Dialogue, for this opportunity. It's an honor for me to be here with such accomplished individuals as Dr. Martin Lammer, Ms. Susan Hubbard, and Mr. Tetsuro Narita. As we know, the Latin America and the Caribbean region has suffered from low growth and large income inequalities. In some parts of the region, even access to basic services such as affordable quality health care, quality education, water and sanitation services, and citizen security are still not enjoyed by all. Youth unemployment has also been a growing concern. And while broadband internet access can be an enabler for development in this age of digitization, the disparities in connectivity are worrying. Firstly, let me bore you with a little bit about JICA. JICA is the government of Japan's bilateral aid agency that provides technical cooperation, grants, sovereign loans, non-sovereign loans, and equity, as well as emergency assistance and volunteers. To mention some areas of assistance, we have built or refurbished 1,059 health and medical facilities since 2008 and have supported the construction of water supply facilities to about 80 million people worldwide since 1999. JICA has 96 offices across the world, with 25 in the Latin America and Caribbean region. With regard to the region, Japan started its bilateral cooperation in 1958. Our current regional strategy has 3 pillars to support quality infrastructure development, tackle global issues such as climate change and environment degradation, and reduce income inequalities. We continue to provide support under the vision of human security for all. Human security is a concept that aims to create a world in which everyone can live with dignity and free from fear and want, with an emphasis on the protection and empowerment of individuals. JICA also works in line with the government of Japan's commitments to the SDGs and the G20 commitments, like the promotion of universal health coverage, quality infrastructure, disaster risk reduction, and resilience, and women's participation. Over the years, the region's development challenges have changed. One example, as we saw through the devastating impact of the recent hurricanes Eta and Iota, is natural disasters, which are getting more intense and frequent with climate change. Japan is a disaster-prone country, and we share the region's sense of uncertainty and fear against these intensifying natural disasters. We are reminded of the importance of bosai, which is the Japanese word for investing in disaster prevention, building resilience, and educating individuals to protect their own livelihoods. Recently, the application of the word bosai does not seem to have to be limited to natural disasters. The pandemic also requires preventive measures, building resilience, and educating individuals to protect their own lives, along with their families and their communities. Anyway, so we are challenged with a global pandemic that has not been experienced in recent history. Japan has about 150,000 cases and 2,100 deaths cumulatively, while countries in the region, Brazil, Argentina, Colombia, Mexico, Peru, are unfortunately among the top in cases and deaths globally, with the same levels of capacity as developed countries. Hospitals and medical workers are stretched beyond their capacity to attend to the pandemic. This not only puts medical workers and patients in danger, but deprives their capacity to attend to normal healthcare needs, such as maternal health care, care for non-communicable diseases, and care for the elderly. The short-term response from JICA has been to provide equipment such as masks, alcoholic gels, gloves, and test kits to counterparts. We have also conducted several webinars in Brazil, Central America, Colombia, and Peru to share Japan's experiences against the pandemic. In many cases, we are also assisting our technical cooperation counterparts against the pandemic. An example is the Dominican Republic, where we have several ongoing technical cooperation projects. In September, JICA supported the setting up of COVID-19 protocols for the tax directorate of the Dominican Republic, who have to continue their working during the pandemic. In July, we jointly created a set of protocols for the tourism industry through our community-based tourism project to promote proper understanding of the COVID-19 risks and help create a safe and hygienic environment in the industry. So these are short-term responses that are being implemented at the moment. Our midterm strategy in relation to COVID-19 is in line with promoting human security to promote better prevention, precaution, and treatment. Prevention includes measures to support water facilities, proper hygiene, and nutrition. Strengthening precautionary capacities entails strengthening the health and medical systems, upgrading the disease prevention and research centers, as well as inviting researchers to Japan for disease prevention and global health are also part of the strategy. To provide better treatment, support for better infrastructure in combination with equipment and capacity development of medical personnel on the ground are also vital areas of cooperation that we look forward to. Our support for COVID-19 recovery is not only in the health sector. In August, JICA signed a loan agreement with the government of Paraguay to upgrade water and sanitation system in Ciudad del Este, eastern part of the Paraguay. As I mentioned in the beginning, many people in the region still do not have access to quality public services. In Paraguay, even if they have basic infrastructure, some of the systems are old, and the quality of service in both urban and rural area is not as good as it can be. The water treatment plant in Ciudad del Este is about 35 years old, and its water source is not stable. So JICA, as a promoter of human security for all, is very much concerned and interested in supporting quality infrastructure in the region. In terms of the economy, the region is expected to contract by an average of 8.1% according to the IMF. Millions of people are losing their jobs and are expected to fall back into poverty. Many, especially the youth and those working in the informal sector, do not have the savings and the means to protect themselves against these shocks. We congratulate the government of the region for providing emergency packages to its vulnerable people and businesses. And JICA looks forward to working with these governments to provide budgetary support through its concessionary loans. One example is our standby facility to El Salvador for $50 million, which was disbursed in March. We are very happy to hear that the funds were utilized to build a hospital in a response to this pandemic. We understand that public debt levels are on the rise, with such expenditures to provide support to the vulnerable have to continue. So public financial management is crucial, and when JICA talks about quality infrastructure investments, it stresses transparency, investment decisions based on the life cycle cost, consideration to resiliency to natural disasters, and considerations to social environmental impacts. JICA recently had discussions with the World Bank LAC region Vice President Felipe Jaramillo, who reiterated the importance of rethinking the future. This means LAC should not continue on path of low growth, low productivity, and increasing income disparities. Its leaders must take away the hurdles that hinder productive growth and socioeconomic inclusion. We are looking forward to deepening our work with the World Bank in Guatemala and Bolivia, especially in the areas of nutrition and strengthening health systems, which have some of the lowest health-related indicators in the region. Guatemala has a high level of inequality, and JICA targets its support in the health sector to the most vulnerable, the indigenous population. One of the JICA's strengths was that it sent Japanese volunteers with professional experience in Japan's health sector to these regions. These volunteers lived in the village, learned the indigenous language, and build trust with the community in order to teach and empower mothers on the importance of child nutrition. Bolivia is another successful example where JICA has promoted maternal and child health care by developing the capacity of medical professionals and by strengthening the network between the individuals, communities, and health institutions. This comprehensive model is called FORSA and has been replicated across Bolivia. I must add, when I talk about Bolivia, that one of the JICA's approaches is to build on its past successes. Currently, Japan Hospital in Santa Cruz, Bolivia, is at the forefront of the fight against COVID-19. This hospital was granted in 1983 by JICA, and its personnel have received continuous training over the years. So we are very happy to see the hospital contributing to Bolivia's response to the pandemic. We sincerely hope for the recovery of those who have been infected and encourages others to maintain their preventive measures. JICA has also worked with the Inter-American Development Bank in quality infrastructure development, renewable energy, and energy efficiency through a framework that we call the Core for Finance Framework. We are currently in discussion to expand our collaboration to include health with a focus on achieving universal health coverage and to promote investments in disaster risk reduction. We are also looking forward to teaming up with IDB Lab with people like Tetsuo to apply innovative solutions that reach the people in the region. JICA is fully aware that it cannot solve the overwhelming challenge that the region faces. So our strategy is to collaborate with our partners such as the IDB and the World Bank and the private sector to reach our friends in LAC with the best possible resources and solutions available. This is a time for us to join forces, complement each other's strengths, and build back better toward a more resilient and inclusive region. I lead a team of individuals who are very passionate and insistent on the delivering concrete development impact to the region. So I am very confident that we can build back better future together. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was an extremely helpful overview of everything that JICA is doing, both to address COVID-19, but also more broadly in terms of development assistance to the region. So thank you so much. Susan, I think probably much of what you were planning to say has been covered to some degree, but I'd be very interested in your assessment of what JICA is doing, and if in fact there are other areas in which JICA or other Japanese agencies, entities might focus in the health sphere.
Great, thank you, Margaret, and thank you to the Inter-American Dialogue for organizing this great discussion. So I'm not an expert on Latin America, and I'm going to be speaking more from my experience as an observer of Japan's development and global health policy over the past couple of decades, as well as touching on some priorities more broadly in the global health field. And as Margaret mentioned, Mr. Yoshida already touched on some of these, which is great. But I just wanted to start first to pick up a little bit more on a couple of the priorities that Mr. Yoshida mentioned that have been very important priorities for Japan, for Japan's international cooperation over the past couple of decades. Just to give a little bit more of an idea of where the foundations for Japan's international cooperation and diplomacy lie. And the first one, which he mentioned a number of times, is human security, which Japan has been one of the key champions of since around 2000, 2003, when it helped to found the Commission on Human Security at the UN. And human security involves looking at challenges from the perspective of individuals and communities and how they experience vulnerability in their daily lives. And so with that focus on those root causes of vulnerability, that in turn requires recognizing how those sources of vulnerability feed off of each other and developing solutions through participatory methods that address those interrelationships. And COVID-19 has really highlighted, rather tragically in many places, the importance of focusing on these comprehensive approaches to building resiliency so that a crisis in one part of people's lives doesn't create crisis or catastrophe in others. And then the other big priority that Mr. Yoshida mentioned is universal health coverage. And Japan actually achieved UHC in 1961, while it was still a developing country. The statistic that a lot of people use on that is that at the time, Japan's GDP per capita was roughly equivalent to Sri Lanka's. So one thing that shows us is that you don't have to be a wealthy country in order to achieve UHC. And COVID-19 has really highlighted the importance of affordable access to preventive, diagnostic, and curative services for all at an affordable price. It's also really highlighted the tragedy in terms of human lives, but also household finances that results from not having universal coverage. I also just wanted to make a quick note on Japan on levels of development assistance for health. And there's a push within Japan right now to actually double the percentage of its ODA that goes to development assistance for health. So as well as finding ways to use that assistance more strategically. So I think that that's something that may open some new opportunities for exchange and partnership, both in the with the private sector and the public sector. So I think that's something just to keep an eye on over the coming months. Next, I wanted to touch on just some areas that in the global health field that I think are going to require a lot more international collaboration as we move into the post-COVID era. And these aren't specific to Japan or Latin America, but rather they're areas that will require collaboration on a global scale. And they may be areas that open some opportunities for Japan and Latin America to really take the lead in partnership. The first one is vaccine delivery. This is something that I think is high in a lot of people's minds right now. And this is going to be an all hands on deck challenge, particularly, well, everywhere, but also particularly in places with weaker infrastructure. This is going to require a lot of bilateral development assistance in some places, but also, as Martine has mentioned as well, the partnership with the corporate sector. And that means not just companies that are traditionally associated with the health sector, but also companies with expertise in procurement and delivery systems, infrastructure development, communications, and other areas like that. And from my own experience, in the places where we've seen success fighting other communicable diseases like AIDS, tuberculosis, malaria, those successes have involved very strong corporate partnerships with the public sector. And I've been fortunate enough to have visited a number of partnerships that Japanese corporations have been engaged in Africa and Southeast Asia. And those have really contributed quite a bit to major health improvements in those communities. And now is the time to really start mobilizing all parties to be prepared to deliver those vaccines as soon as they're available. Another area that's going to require sustained global cooperation is climate change. And there really should be heightened interest right now in the impact of climate change on health, both in terms of infectious diseases, but also in the non-communicable chronic diseases that we continue to grapple with daily, regardless of pandemic or not. Also, I think it's important to keep in mind that COVID will likely not be the last pathogen to threaten the entire globe during our lifetime. And we really need to start preparing now while this experience is fresh in our minds for the next outbreak. And one area that I think really requires a lot of work and global collaboration is surveillance systems, particularly on zoonotic diseases, those that start in the animal population and cross into human populations the way COVID did. And I think COVID has really shown us that we need to strengthen how we develop that surveillance and how we share information quickly and accurately, so that we can better recognize where diseases are spreading and when they're just starting to cross into human populations. And then another area that's always at the top of global health agendas is the health workforce, training and retaining the health workforce. And of course, we've seen in many places where the health workforce has been quickly overwhelmed and really overstretched. And when we talk about the health workforce, it's not just the healthcare workers who are the most visible, but also those working in health information systems, health management, health policy making. And those are areas where I think it's important to build those cross-national networks, get these networks built now so that they're in place when the next crisis hits. And then I just wanted to close my initial remarks with a plug for people-to-people exchange, because we will eventually get to a point where we can meet in person again safely. And I work for an organization that has put people-to-people exchange at its core since it was founded in 1970. And even before COVID, we were already seeing a decrease in in-person discussions. And that's in part because technology has made it easier and much cheaper to meet virtually, which has expanded a lot of opportunities. But I think there's a risk that our success in remaining connected virtually during this pandemic will prompt people to keep more international discussions virtual even after COVID is no longer a risk. But there's a lot of brainstorming and relationship building that happens in the informal discussions during coffee breaks, over meals, and things like that. And those are interactions that are lost in a lot of the virtual meetings. So I just wanted to mention that as, I hope that as we're thinking about post-COVID relationships between Japan and the Americas region, that we'll also be keeping in mind the value of maintaining those human interactions. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Susan, for the really fascinating and wide-ranging viewpoints. It strikes me that a lot of what you're recommending is, in fact, some of the work that JICA is prioritizing at the moment, but much of the rest of it will require really a global effort and some of the partnerships of the sort that Yoshida-san mentioned, with multilateral development banks, with other donor nations, or economic partners in the region to achieve some of these very lofty and challenging objectives. So thank you so much for that. And now let's move to Tetsuro Narita for an assessment of perhaps what might be done in the innovation space. And I don't know whether any of this disease surveillance has perhaps come up as within IDB Lab as something that the IDB might look to try to support.
Okay, thank you very much, Margaret. Thank Inter-American Dialogue for inviting me this very interesting and important discussion session. As many of you know, well, the IDB Lab is an innovation laboratory of the Inter-American Development Bank, testing or trying private sector-driven innovation and solutions to combine with developmental challenges to see if those innovation and the solution can work or not. And then we are also proactively seek technological innovations to test as the innovation lab. For example, well, maybe not to tell everything on what we are doing at this moment, but I think I receive a 7 to 8 minutes a slot during this discussion. So considering the today's discussion point and the time I have, I'd like to concentrate on maybe two topics. One is artificial intelligence, and the another one is aging society. We call it a silver economy. And then explain what we are doing in Latin America in those areas. And then I think these two topics are very relevant or accelerated those discussions during the pandemic, and topics very, very relevant topics even after COVID-19. And also, I think, well, I'm just picking two topics, but these two topics are also relevant for continuing and seeking potential collaboration with Japan or Japanese companies. So I hope these topics are, well, very, very, very short remarks, but these topics are further fomenting today's discussion. So first, artificial intelligence. When we say artificial intelligence, not only artificial intelligence or machine learning per se, but broadly speaking, and we are talking about responsible data handling. Also in Latin America, not only private sector, but also public sector side have been, have been showing interest in the potential of using artificial intelligence solution to provide education or labor market solution, access to finance and health services, in Latin America. So before pandemic, already there was a very strong interest in the potential of artificial intelligence in providing public services. And that discussion has accelerated and during the COVID-19, and many innovations or many discussions are happening in a very short term, which otherwise could have taken years. And then, for example, well, even though the general interest in artificial intelligence is increasing, and so many discussions are happening around the potential of maximizing the data. Also, there are pros and cons, and we have to think about the potential risks of those technologies, and especially including artificial intelligence process. So that's why since last year, we launched an initiative called Fair-LAC. It's an initiative to promote ethical use of artificial intelligence and responsible data handling for using such kind of technologies in combining programs related to public services. So, for example, so many ideas before and during the COVID-19, so many ideas of using artificial intelligence or big data are happening. For example, especially at this context, to provide health services or health-related solutions. Handling big data and then applying artificial intelligence process. But for us, the Fair-LAC initiative is a perfect timing, because the initiative is to promote, as I mentioned, is to promote ethical data handling and an ethical artificial intelligence, so that new technology not exclude the specific population. I mean, the innovation should be for further inclusion, or inclusion should be done with such kind of innovation. So we are promoting the ethical AI and the responsible data handling, and especially at this moment of COVID-19 and beyond, so that utilizing the data and then applying new technology like artificial intelligence and further promote inclusion in Latin America. And related to COVID-19, for example, we quickly launched a call for proposal among private sector players, and to provide financing for prototyping. And then we received more than 500 proposals, and then applying, established and screening, and we finally financed between 20-25 ideas, and to see if prototyping can accelerate flattening the curve of COVID-19, but the many of or several of those ideas and proposed and then financed actually using the personal data or big data handling. So that's why combining with the FAIR-LAC initiative, we pay special attention to those projects and those proposals, and which utilize big data or personal data to embed ethical approach or responsible approach in handling those data or data governance, and in case of applying artificial intelligence process to embed ethical use of AI in those ideas. So one area we have been doing is something related to artificial intelligence or responsible data handling, and then we have, well, perfect timing. We have an initiative called FAIR-LAC to support private sector players to think about ethical approach or responsible data handling. So that is the first point. And the second point is silver economy. Well, the aging society. I don't know. I think many of the participants today are experts in Latin America. So maybe, I don't know. I think many of participants already know, but the Latin America, very quickly happening aging society, actually, especially in South American countries, some South American countries. So we have to be prepared. And during the COVID, the elders are one of the most vulnerable population segments in terms of not being able to going outside and the fear of being affected, but they have necessities of visiting hospitals or clinics or farmers or etc. So the elders are one of the population segment and which has been affected severely with COVID-19, and the aging society. Aging is happening in some of Latin American countries, and then we started looking at that topic, not because COVID-19, but now coincidentally, combined that topic with COVID-19. But so recently we published we made a publication about aging society or circular economy in Latin America. Well, basically, the publication is a kind of wake-up call, attracting the attention to Latin America, saying this topic may come. So this is a kind to attract attention to this topic in Latin America. And for example, regarding the silver economy, one is of course, one important topic is how to provide healthcare or preventive healthcare to this population segment, not only because of COVID-19, but beyond COVID-19 or moving forward. But then also another important topic related to aging society is how to provide opportunities, quote unquote, to the older people which are still ready to be in labor market. So how to provide 21st century skills or reskilling, and then how to combine them, how to combine supply and demand in labor market. So it is not an easy task, but we are also providing such kind of initial insights and through the publication. And I think this topic is something very relevant for potential collaboration with with Japan or Japanese companies. So just today I explain, two examples and we are doing in IDB Lab, but in addition to the two topics that I mentioned, and of course, as Yoshida-san mentioned, we have ongoing very innovative projects in Latin America, for example, applying IoT, artificial intelligence solutions to improving the farm productivity, especially in rice farming in Latin America. And then also we have a project to improve the productivity of aquaculture in Latin America, utilizing also artificial intelligence process. And the solution provider comes from Japan. Even trying to apply, for example, satellite imageries to monitor to monitor what's happening in the ocean. So such kind of ongoing project and already happening in Latin America through the collaboration between Japan, Latin America, or between JICA IDB Lab. And then I hope to have another opportunity to be able to provide impact and results of those projects. But just to finish, for example, we are interested in continuing such kind of collaboration with JICA or with other Japanese entities or Japan, not at company by company, project by project, or ad hoc level, but then we are also interested in somehow to combining a private sector ecosystem, innovation ecosystem between Latin America and Japan to see how, for example, in Latin America, we also have in Latin America some innovation. So how we attract Japanese innovation to Latin America, but then at the same time, we are interested in connecting an ecosystem, how we can present Latin American innovation even to Asian markets. So we are also interested, going beyond project by project or ad hoc basis collaboration, but then we are interested in seeking something beyond. So with that, and I finish my intervention, and thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you so much. That was fascinating, and I think reinforces some of the points made by some of the other panelists. Martine's notes about the importance of strengthening trade and investment linkages, especially in these value-added sectors or industries. And of course, it's not just about digitization or employment of new AI and other technologies, but doing so carefully, mindfully, to achieve best outcomes, including in terms of data privacy and security. So thank you so much, Narita-san, for that very helpful overview. We have a number of questions already posed here, and let me please remind the participants to submit any questions via the Q&A feature on Zoom. Or for those who are watching on YouTube, please feel free to do so through Twitter using hashtag Japan-LAC, LAC 2020, or through meetings@thedialogue.org, and we'll address those as they come in. Let me start out by asking a couple questions, and sort of anyone who would like to respond, please feel free to do so. But one question that I think is on the mind of a lot of people, or at least we've had this question asked in a number of other Japan-related events, is just what might happen now that there's been something of a political transition in Japan with a new prime minister. And should we expect some changes, especially in terms of overseas development assistance, or in terms of a sort of policy toward Latin America? And I should probably ask this of somebody from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but perhaps Yoshida-san, you might have some thoughts on at least at the ODA level, what might be happening in terms of any changes. Certainly, we saw from the Abe administration, we saw a real focus on a policy called Juntos, right, which focused on sort of promoting free and open markets, on working with Latin America to ensure sort of rules-based economic architecture, and also on the promotion of quality infrastructure, quality investment, and sustainable sustainable projects. Do you see any real changes to that approach, or is it something that we're likely to continue seeing that same sort of interest in those areas despite a new prime minister being in place? And Susan, it would be interesting to hear from you too. You had mentioned that there's a push to increase some of this overseas, investment, especially in the health area. And I wonder if that's in fact related to the political developments in Japan or not, or perhaps it's just a function of there being such a tremendous global crisis at the moment that, it really necessitates more in the way of engagement. And then, let me also ask of Martine specifically, but really anyone else who would like to comment. Martine, you mentioned, the need for more in the way of trade agreements, of investment that will be promoting of trade, and certainly Japanese investment in the auto sector and in other sectors in Latin America has facilitated much in the way of sort of exportation of high value added goods from those countries, despite not showing up in sort of the Japan Latin America trade statistics. But I wonder what you think about the TPP 11 and what prospects there are for enhanced trade related engagement as a result of that particular trade pact. So let me turn the floor maybe perhaps to Mr. Yoshida.
Yes. Thank you very much. Regarding the change of the Prime Minister, ex-Prime Minister Abe put importance on the LAC countries and visit some countries in the 2014, 16, and 18. Also, Prime Minister Suga now is likely to succeed the policy. Once the COVID-19 infection calms down, Japan will promote not only international cooperation, but also the economic relationship with the Japanese private sector. And also, JICA. JICA supports LAC countries as well as Caribbean countries. And also, about China, we'll partner with China in the area where we could. But however, it is important to share the values such as freedom and equity. That's all, yeah.
Thank you so much. And so there's actually a follow-up question here in the Q&A about, several have mentioned a focus on the importance of incorporating the private sector in some of these initiatives. And how does JICA specifically do that? Is it through partnership in sort of the development of some of these projects, or in what other form?
For private sector?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. How is the private sector involved in what JICA does specifically?
Yeah, we will now private sector. We now a lot of sector. Yeah, we now finance. For example, last year, the finance to the private sector. Yeah, the LAC region, the half of the total JICA we finance. So, but not only a specific some sector. Yeah, we consider the any we considered any sector?
Sure. So it would be cooperation across the board, but occasionally with involvement from Japanese or other companies when possible, depending upon the nature of the project. That makes good sense. And perhaps we could, Narita-san might have some additional details about the extent to which private sector is playing a role in a lot of their projects. Certainly it is, since they're receiving a lot of the finance for these things. Yeah. Thank you so much. Let me turn to Susan just for clarification on that one point.
Sure. So first of all, in terms of the change of prime minister in Japan, I think it's also important to remember that Suga was Abe's chief cabinet secretary and very involved in policy making in the Abe administration. So we're not necessarily seeing a lot of, or expecting a lot of change in that sense. In terms of the push for doubling the development assistance for health, that's actually something that came out of a public-private dialogue with a number of political and government leaders, civil society and academic leaders as well, that JCIE was also involved in running, and including with a former health secretary. And so those are so that's the recommendation that has come out of that process and is being discussed within the government right now. And it's building on really years of Japan's interest in global health, really strengthening and growing. We see a lot of even public surveys of the general public on opinions about ODA always show a very strong interest in supporting global health, and in part because Japan actually has, compared with a lot of places, a very successful health system. So I think we'll see that trend continue.
Thank you so much, Susan. And Martin, regarding TPP-11 or really any other mechanism for expanding trade?
Sure. So TPP-11, of course, the signing, the gradual ratification of TPP-11 is good news in many ways, and it has potential. But I think when we look in perspective, Latin America has signed the most trade agreements in the world. When we count them by country, with all the bilateral components of each of these multilateral arrangements, the only other region in the world that has signed as many trade agreements as ours is Western Europe. And yet the difference in terms of trade is huge. Latin America, if you take exports plus imports of goods and services over GDP, is the closest region in the world, the most closest region in the world. So agreements alone may not be sufficient. And we keep insisting on them, but the problem is how much teeth they have, how much ability to influence what is one of the main drawbacks of our region, which is the presence of vested interests that are cozy with governments that can manage to tilt competition in their favor, to keep protected, even if import substitution has formally ended. And what we see with this low openness of the region is this combination of a region that is very rich in natural resources, and that pushes you to specialize in just a few things, but also a region with strong vested interests. And so we see more, where we see the most potential is in the agreements that in reality go way beyond trade. The agreements that touch on issues like competition, subsidies, state-owned enterprises, intellectual property rights, the deep trade agreements of the new generation that in reality by now go way beyond what was covered by the WTO. In one analysis we did at the World Bank, we find that the deep trade agreements by now cover up to 55 policy areas. WTO deals with a dozen of them. When you have the political economy of Latin American countries, is these strong, deep trade agreements, like the recent US-Mexico-Canada, like the EU-Mercosur agreement, that can influence things. And so if I have to think from the perspective of a country like Japan, what you want to have is, of course, the agreements that give you access, say, to the US market at the time with the US, regardless of which party is in power, I believe, will be interested in diversifying its supply. So we'll be interested in looking at its own backyard and the potential in its own backyard. You also need the institutional architecture that protects your companies, protects your investments, prevents bad surprises, unfair competition, reversal of rules. And it's in that respect that I mentioned the experience with Vietnam, because that experience involved, through the participation in policy lending across a variety that touch on a variety of reforms, including all the support to WTO accession, but finance, competition, and so on and so forth. There may be potential there in that combination of investments, logistics, and policy through these deep trade agreements. At present, some of the countries, Mexico, Colombia, Peru, Chile, have some of them. I think the big challenge will be for the Mercosur and with Brazil in particular. I think a region where Mexico and Brazil will be willing to lead the charge in this reconfiguration of global value chains will open up a lot of opportunities. But that will require that Latin Americans agree to tie their hands through agreements that are tough. You don't respect the rules and their consequences. At present, we have a lot of agreements where we don't respect the rules, and okay, we will talk next year and we will see what we can do about it. So that would be my take. That
makes tremendous sense. On that point, let me turn to Tetsuro. What is your assessment of sort of the policy environment or protections in the innovation space in Latin America? Are they sufficient to be promoting of investment or attracting investment from critical investors like Japan? Or is it an environment that is, still a bit too precarious, or where the conditions are not there to really attract what's needed? Do you have a sense of that? Or what perhaps is the IDB or your IDB at Lab doing to maybe try and address some of these potential deficiencies?
Very challenging question. Thank you.
I apologize for that.
For example, I provided an example of artificial intelligence, and very few countries have regulatory environment regarding the privacy or personal data, or just having something very basic. But what we are doing on private sector is, for example, in terms, sorry for concentrating on artificial intelligence, or what we are doing in artificial intelligence is that, at this moment, and then also from private sector side or IDB Lab, we are not, rather than creating additional principle or guidelines, we are creating something very practical tool for entrepreneurs. So we are creating entrepreneurial centric tool so that they entrepreneurs or companies do self-assessment of their standing regarding the ethical approach or responsible data handling in artificial intelligence or data management. So and that practical tool is based on international best practices, and we learned a lot, and for example from GDPR in Europe. But rather than creating regulation, because we are private sector window, so rather than creating regulation or principles, we are creating pragmatic tool for entrepreneurs to self-diagnose their standing of using artificial intelligence, etc. But what we are doing, for example, when we say ethical approach, we are not saying to the company you are unethical. We of course first identifying, we're not identifying technology, we are identifying solution with potential impacts. And some of them utilize new technologies. So through that filter, already, identified companies, for example, on our side, are doing something good, and then trying to respect all the potential regulation or existing and potential regulation. And then what we are bringing to those companies is, already complying existing regulation or expected regulation, and then giving, bringing them to the excellence level. To be a kind of reference point of using new technology for developmental area. So that is what is our approach. And then just to finish, for example, public-private is very important and many of the technologies have B2G approach. And then more and more we are seeing publication or webinars or seminars, et cetera, regarding B2G technologies or B2G solutions, innovations. And then we are paying attention to what's happening in that space. But then also it's true that several governments or public sectors are interested in using such kind of innovation technology or knowing more in technology and solutions. And then what we are doing in IDB Lab is we are IDB group. And then we are part of private sector, but then inside the IDB group, of course, the big chunk of the functionality is for public sector. So we have IDB. So we IDB Lab, we work with private sector, but then looking inside of the IDB group,
right?
And then having a conversation with IDB experts, in public sector side to identify or to connect how public sector interest in trying something new or in implementing an innovation, and then we bringing at the menu of B2G approaches or new innovation, and to see how some of them can match or not. So that is what we are doing to promote a kind of public-private collaboration or connection.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Let me turn. We have a couple more questions, and let me turn back to Yoshida-san. One is that you mentioned that there might be the possibility for cooperating with China or other sort of East Asian partners, or even others to on a series of projects in the Latin American and Caribbean region. How do you see Japan's, ODA or broader assistance in the region differing from that of other East Asian countries, if at all? I'd be very interested in knowing that. And then beyond that, there's a kind of I don't know if you have an answer to this question, but we received a question from Emilio. Should Japan and Latin America launch a TILACD is what he calls it, to mirror the success of the TCAD in Japan and Africa, the sort of high-level political dialogue and collaboration? Perhaps that's also a question for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Japan, but nevertheless, if you have a response to that, by all means. But otherwise, yeah, really, in what ways is what Japan is doing in Latin America right now, through JICA specifically, different from other sort of ODA providers?
Oh, thank you, Margaret. I'm not an expert on the other countries ODA to the region, so I will try to answer that the best I can by stressing some of the strong characteristics of Japan's ODA to the region. JICA believes that building and maintaining trust is crucial. Our president, Kitaoka, reiterates that Japan must lead the world with trust. What I want to mention is the foundation of trust that the Japanese immigrants have created in the region. Japanese immigration to the region started in 1897 to Mexico, and in 1899 to Peru and Bolivia, and later in 1908 to Brazil. These people, together with other immigrants from Europe and the Arab region, have contributed greatly to nation building. For example, Japanese immigrants are known for their contribution to the development of the agricultural sector in Brazil. At one point, Most of the middlemen in Sao Paulo's vegetable market were Japanese or Nikkei. The Japanese works hard to develop a reliable production, distribution, and sales supply chain, which I believe is one of the soft structures that were built by Nikkei people. So through this example, I wanted to share with you that JICA feels a strong connection to the region built on the long-built trust by the Nikkei community, and JICA wants to make sure that trust is maintained for further cooperation and development. JICA has sent experts and volunteers, it has built villages and hospitals through grants, and it has supported power plant and road through its loans. Now we are also providing budget support through our loans and private sector financing to companies that have development impact. Recently, we are working to help create a JICA chair or JICA program for Japanese studies in the universities across the region to learn about the Japanese development experiences. This is not only about its post-war economic success, but about its modern history from having a feudal system to modern democracy. We may not have been the quickest, but we do take our time to understand the underlying development challenges and the socio-cultural context, and try to design the best solution possible in a collaborative manner. We are dedicated to development results. I explained that Japan's bilateral cooperation to the region started in 1958, so we have 60 years of experience, but that doesn't mean we stop learning. We have to keep learning and understanding each other because the region, the world, and solutions is solved. So I always encourage my team to understand deeply, have compassion, and work creatively. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I mean, that's really interesting. And having studied this relationship, I'm certainly no expert, but it is very clear that you know, Japanese institutions that engage with Latin America via JICA or JBIC really do view, you know, and formulate this sort of engagement with a really extensive historical context in mind, and taking advantage of, you know, as you mentioned, the extensive Nikkei networks that are apparent in countries like Brazil and Peru and elsewhere. So thank you. That is really very helpful, and that really does conclude. Actually, we're at the end of our session without any more questions from the audience, and so please. Allow me to thank you all again for these excellent contributions. I think all of the presentations were exceptionally complimentary, and I am grateful, especially to those who went to great lengths to be here despite time differences and travel schedules and everything else. I will ask the virtual audience to extend their thanks through silent applause, and I hope to have you all back here at the dialogue at some point. For those who are still on, we will be generating a small report based on findings from this meeting and a meeting held yesterday in Spanish on a similar topic, which will be published by the dialogue within a couple of weeks. So thank you again to our panelists, and have a wonderful morning. Or evening, for that matter. Bye-bye.